Thank you. Good morning, everybody, here and on live stream. We're glad that you all have joined us. We're glad that we can get back into the Word again this Sunday in the book of Nehemiah. Before we turn to those pages, let's go ahead and come to the Lord. God, we thank you for giving us this Word, for inspiring the writers who put these words down, that your Holy Spirit guided them as such, that your Holy Spirit allowed that Word to be preserved throughout millennia and generations, meticulously, so that the word we're reading right now is the same word that was originally directed by you to those writers, Lord. I pray that as we read through it daily or daily-ish as our schedule directs, Lord, that we are hearing from you that frequently, if not more, that we are open to how your word can instruct us and guide us and ultimately conform us to be more like your Son, Jesus. In his name we pray. Amen. Okay, you should have read the chapters 5 through 8 of the book of Nehemiah. That's what will be, that'll be what's on the table today for Q&A and my prepared lesson. Although I'm going to go backwards a little bit. I'll tell you about that when we get there. This week's readings, you will finish the book. So 9 through 13 of the book of Nehemiah is what's on tap for this coming. So you'll still have a couple of days respite if you choose to take it. With that, anybody have any thoughts or comments on the readings from this week? Any questions or otherwise you want to raise in the open mic session? Anybody at all? Yes, Sharon. Hi, welcome here.
Y'all missed me last week. Yes, we did.
We did. So you got to double up this week, Sharon. I literally called you out. So I missed Sharon last week because she was would have given me some 6 questions.
In chapter 8.
All right.
I'm specific. I see it in verse 2, and I think I see it again in verse 3, maybe, where it said, Ezra brought the law before the assembly, both men and women, and all who could understand what they heard. It says it in verse 2, and then if you go on and read it in verse 3, it says, in the presence of the men and the women and those who could understand.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it was meaning, some people were mentally challenged. I don't think that's exactly what it was talking about. I took it more to be maybe, he's talking to the Israelites and they knew Hebrew, and he's reading the scrolls, I'm assuming, or the book of the law. So those who knew Hebrew were understanding what he was saying. It doesn't say they translated, but God can make anybody understand what's being presented. But I thought somewhere, and I may be reading ahead.
How dare you, Sharon?
But I thought somewhere
overachiever.
They read again, and it said something like, all understood. So I didn't know what your thoughts were on that.
Honestly,
only
Sharon,
those who could understand.
Yeah. So that is good. Honestly, I didn't key into that verbiage, but I think my gut reaction would say that's probably more a function of language barrier issues than some kind of a mental deficit, reference, be my guess.
Right. They came back to a land that other peoples had occupied, another, but he's reading from, I'm assuming, Hebrew.
Yes.
So if they didn't know Hebrew.
Right. And it may also be more than, certainly the language, the understandability of the words that are spoken, but that may also be a reference to the heritage understanding of the Jews, because this is their history as opposed to some outsider hearing it, maybe understand the language, but don't quite understand because my people didn't live through that, and those stories weren't communicated to me, whereas I am a Hebrew, I know the language, and more than that, I recall great granny so-and-so kind of tell me some of these stories, and the word's been lost for a while, but now I'm hearing it again, and it's a riper understanding because of my context. I don't know that that's really what that phrase means, but my guess is probably something along those lines.
It also could be that, all people can learn God's ways, or, teaching, and they didn't know it, so, just like going to school.
Yes, agree. And I do recall, and I don't, likewise, since I'm ahead of you all, I don't recall if it happened in chapter 8 or 9 or whatever, but there was at least one segment in here where, whether it was translation or just Nehemiah or Ezra's reading from some distance, and there were folks that were like closer to the crowd that was like maybe echoing it or giving a little further insight. I know we've seen that somewhere in here. So clearly the aim of the public reading was one, to dust off God's word that had been forsaken, and then folks hadn't heard it in a long time. Maybe some of these folks had never heard it directly, but was to make it known and to make it understandable. So if you're right that later on there's a reference that they all understood versus all that could understand, that would be an interesting. I'd like you to, if you can find that phrase, because that would connect that dot, I think, and it would be interesting to do that. Patrick, you're going to say something.
I think there's a bit of a multi-generational thing.
Sure.
On here. So,
yeah.
4 and 5-year-olds are learning the language, they're understanding the words, to that level. I'm sure someone had a 5-year-old and a baby, and, the baby, it's not necessarily meant for them.
Right.
But yeah, I think it goes down to the generations, teenagers, young people, 6-year-olds that are actually walking, talking, understanding mom and dad. And then it goes on to talk about how they made the words clear. The Levites taught the people what the word was saying.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was remembering. There was like it was spoken, and then there was like some time for.
Verse 8 of chapter 8.
All right, thank you,
They read
Tessa.
from the book, from the law of God clearly. And they gave the sense, my Bible says, so that the people understood the reading. But then I had written, and I don't know if I wrote it in here while I was reading or somebody had preached on it before, but I have the word here, translate.
Yeah, my translation actually says that. I'll read from mine. It says, they read the book of the law. I'm reading chapter 8, verse 8. They read the book of the law of God, translating and giving the meanings so that the people could understand what was read.
So there we go. I knew I read it.
Mm-hmm. No, you did. And that's interesting. And yeah, and to Patrick's point, if the audience consists of young and old, there's going to be different levels of understanding. One, the kid might understand the words but not really grasp the concept. Older people will understand the concept. Maybe older still will recall these stories being passed down. But the public reading clearly, in both Ezra and in Nehemiah, the public reading of the word had a drastic impact on the audience. And we saw the weeping, and Nehemiah is kind of discouraging the weeping. This is a day to glorify God, not to be sorrowful. I had a note on that. Where's my note on that? Chapter 8. I put, note to self, the response to comprehension was both sorrow and joy. Because they realized, oh my goodness, this is the standard, and this is what God requires of me, and I have not done this, and I feel terrible. Yet at the same time, the leaders were encouraging that emotional reaction to not dwell on sorrow, but to turn to joy. That now that the Lord does care about you and does want a life lived well and is giving you guidance on how to do that, and He spared you, and blah, blah, you should be happy and praising. So I think I made that note to self because some question what's the value of the law post Jesus. Some of the value of the law is to convict. Clearly, these people were convicted. And you don't recognize your need for Savior until you recognize, the hole you're in, so to speak, the need to be rescued. So, amen. Thank you, Sharon. Good round of questions there. Any other thoughts or comments on this week's readings?
And I was like, yay, Nehemiah, when he called out the nobles for the oppression of the poor.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing this and you're doing this, and then they have to turn around and buy it back from you, or you're taxing.
Yep. That was chapter 6, was it? 5. Might have been 5. Yeah, you're right, 5. Yeah, charging interest.
Give them all back to them. Give them their lands, give them their vineyards, give them their houses, give them their percentage.
I agree. At this time, this should not have been an enterprising moment. It should have been a let's get our nation established. Then we can go back to norms of commerce. But right now, it's not about bleeding your fellow citizens dry with what little they have. All right, so let me, I will transition us to the lesson I've got. I think I might need this amount of time. Both the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, as we talked about last week, deal with the return of the Jews who had been exiled. Both of them show opposition. Both of them show that these returning Jews faced various levels of opposition. I have labeled that anti-Semitism, to some extent. It might have been Jewish specific. It might have been, we don't want whoever you are in our land, this is now the land we occupy and you're not welcome. It happened to be the Jews that were showing up. But because it shows up in both books, I wanted to pause and reflect on the opposition that they felt and try to pull out of it some insights and teaching moments for us, for the opposition, quote unquote, that we might be facing or might face moving forward. So first I wanted to step back and recognize that not all opposition is from the enemy. So to set that stage, it's, I hope, an easy question. Why had the Jews been exiled to Babylon?
Idol worship.
Thank you. And that's a very concise nutshell. So they basically had rebelled against God. And God had warned them. God had sent prophet after prophet. Every now and then a good king showed up that kind of spoke the same words. That they didn't happen all that often. But the people were advised countless times, you need to obey me, not defy me. And you need to stop these practices and the idol worship specifically and the intermarrying with pagan folk who were going to bring that into your household and this, that, and the other. And God even warned them to say, basically, if you don't stop, you're going to face some trouble. And like specifically, you're going to be conquered by an enemy nation. And they didn't care. They didn't listen to that. So sure enough, God sent 2 waves of that. One was via the Assyrians capturing the northern kingdom, the nation that we would call Israel at that time. And then a couple of kings later, the folks in Judah faced a similar scenario with Babylon. Now, clearly being conquered, being yanked out of your home and shipped off to who knows where, one could easily label that opposition. But this opposition, again, was not of the enemy. This opposition would be better characterized as discipline or judgment from the Lord. And he used enemy nations as his tool to discipline, as his rod, so to speak. But it was from him. And I want to read a couple of verses. Let's all go there. I don't have a ton of reading. So go to, keep your finger, I don't know where you are in Nehemiah. Keep your finger in Nehemiah, but go back to Deuteronomy. We read through the Torah last calendar year, and in here we read from Deuteronomy 8. If I could have a volunteer to read verses 5 and 6 of Deuteronomy 8.
I can do it.
Thank you. Give us just a second, be sure we've all landed. I don't hear a lot of page turning. I think we're good. Go ahead, Jonah.
Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so the Lord your God disciplines you. Observe the commands of the Lord your God, walking in obedience to him and revering him.
Thank you. All right, you can leave Deuteronomy. Go to Proverbs verse 3. We're just going to hit a couple of verses, sort of scattered Old and New Testament, that speak to this point that Jonah just read. Proverbs 3. Somebody else read 11 and 12. Thank you, Rennie. Hang on. Let's get our microphone over to you.
Proverbs 3, 11 and 12.
Yes, and you know what? I'm not quite there myself, so you're really quick. Give me a second to get there.
My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline and do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves, as a father the son he delights in.
Thank you. And last example of the same truth, Hebrews chapter 12. Can somebody read verses 7 through 11 of Hebrews 12?
Okay. 7 through 11?
7 through 11, chapter 12, book of Hebrews. Yes, sir.
If ye endure chastening, God dealeth with you as with sons. For what son is he whom the Father chasteneth not? But if ye be without chastisement, whereof all the partakers, then you are bastards and not sons. Furthermore, we have had our fathers of our flesh, which corrected us, and we gave them reverence. Shall we not much rather be in subjection unto the Father of spirits and live? For they verily for a few days chastened us after their own pleasure, but he for our profit, that we might be partakers of his holiness. Now no chastening for the present seemeth to be joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterward it yieldeth the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you, readers. So, again, this is what happened. This is what caused the people to be exiled. They continued to defy the Lord, and the Lord chastened, disciplined them. Felt very much like opposition, felt very much like oppression, may have felt like an act of the enemy, but was not. And that's the point I want to kind of pause, and as we contemplate the potential scenarios that we have faced or might face in the future, understand that sometimes this stuff, these hard times, are a function of the Lord disciplining us and not an enemy that we need to overcome or some sort of experience that we need to avoid or correct. Because God has given precedent, and this is an example of providing this form of oppressive type forms of discipline to a stiff-necked people. And certainly the Hebrews, my translation, reference them as such. You might have seen that in your translation. We're fairly stiff-necked too. I'd like to say we're not, but we're kind of set in our ways, and we want to go this way. We're not inclined to turn to the Lord if our setting is a little off course, the stiff-necked idea. So understand, again, as we Christians walk through life and encounter things that feel very oppressive and wrong, and gosh, the devil's really getting at me. Maybe, but maybe our Father's getting at us. Our Father's training us so that we can learn from our waywardness and come back to Him and be in good standing where He wants us to be and be useful for Him. So just as a preliminary fundamental point, that's not the scenario, I believe, that's not the scenario, that's not the explanation, I should say, for what the Hebrews encountered when they returned to their land in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. God had disciplined them, and He lived up to it, but He had also prophesied that after 70 years, I will bring you back to your land. So He brought them back to their land. But again, recall that when they were yanked out, the conquering nations had other people that were crowding their space. So they said, all right, we're going to dump some of y'all here, free up room for these Judites, and we're going to get the other ites and stick you in Judah and Israel and Samaria and whatever else. So these folks are here. They've been occupying the land for 70 years-ish or more. Suddenly now Jews come and say, hey, this is our home, y'all get out of here. No. So they're not too kindly welcoming these Jews that are returning. And the tension is there. So it's not God. I don't think this is a continuation of God disciplining His people. He's certainly allowing it to happen. As a sovereign God, He could have wiped them off and just, sent a plague or whatever, and they're gone before the Israelites show up. But He allowed them to be there. I think He allowed that to give the Israelites a chance to struggle and to grow through the struggles of life. And in doing so, He allowed the enemy, i.e. Satan, to have some tools at his disposal to oppose, potentially oppress the Jews. So as we walk through Ezra, as we're walking through Nehemiah, we're seeing various efforts used by truly the enemy to get in the way of what God's people are trying to do. Their goal when they return, again, primarily their first goal is to rebuild the temple so that God's house can be restored and the place of worship can be made right, and also to fortify the city. Jerusalem was a fortified city, as were many bigger, significant cities of the day, and the fortifications were all rubble along the outskirts of town, and they had to build it all together. So I wanted to really, now at this point, kind of look at some of the tactics that Satan used during the books of Ezra and Nehemiah to see some of his methodologies so that we maybe could be better able to detect them when they pop up in our lives. So first, that's why I reference we're going to go back. So we're going to go back to Ezra a little bit. Some of these tactics are better portrayed in Ezra than they are in Nehemiah. So if you're back in Nehemiah, that's great, but go left a decent number of pages to Ezra chapter 4. 1 through 2. Can I get a reader for Ezra 4, verses 1 through 2?
Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the returned exiles were building a temple to the Lord, the God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel and the heads of the fathers' houses and said to them, "Let us build with you. For we worship your God as you do, and we have been sacrificing to Him ever since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here."
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So what is the request being made by these folks?
Oh, let us help you.
Let's help you. Why would they want to help the Jews in this task?
Because they want to find out what's going on, really.
All right. Sabotage. I had labeled it sabotage from within. Infiltrate, yeah. I mean, it's a tactic that's alive, and our military does it, our government does it, so do other governments. It's clear because your translation said their adversaries, mine says the enemies. I mean, these people are labeled before they make the request. The author is telling us this is not a kind-hearted gesture of neighbors that want to help out new neighbors. They're the enemies, and they say, let us help you. Give us trowels and whatever, and we'll help you build this thing. Clearly, they don't have a desire to benefit the Jews, so why would they make the request? They would make the request to kind of get into the fold and to wreak havoc from within. So a tactic, and this I think is more applicable in a group context than it is in an individual context, but one method that the enemy will use to oppose us is sabotage from within. I thankfully have not had that experience at this church or any other prior churches, but some of you may have. Some of you may have been in a place where the family all of a sudden gets splintered and there's a voice of opposition that rallies people around him or her and this sort of thing. That's an example. You see that in the business world all the time. You see that in other groups. The idea that someone can come in, maybe not a newbie, maybe someone that's been there a long time, and the devil turns their heart and now they're a saboteur versus a helper or a teammate. But somebody gets inside the group with what appears to be good intentions and does great harm. So that's one tactic that Satan does use often, and we saw it in Ezra chapter 4. The people here, Zerubbabel and the others, were wise to it. I won't have you read the rest, but verses 3 have said, 1, y'all don't worship the same God, and 2, no, basically. You're not going to come and help us. So they figured out, they sniffed out that tactic decently well. So the folks that were trying to do that went to tactic number 2 in sequence. Can I get someone to read verse 4, the same chapter, Ezra 4, verse 4.
Then the peoples around them set out to discourage the people of Judah and make them afraid to go on building.
All right. So first effort, let us help you know. Second effort, to discourage and generate fear. So let's just talk generally about that. What are some ways that one can become discouraged by another? Just kind of let's think through maybe what were some of the specific efforts that were made by these enemies to discourage the people of Judah and make them afraid to build.
Their building is inferior.
Okay.
It's not going to last, or just discourage the hard work.
Good. All right. So could be speaking words of undervalue or words of doubt. It's not going to work. You should do something else other than this. That's definitely a form of discouragement. Maybe on the kinder side versus you kind of yelling at someone. Other ideas. Let's kind of again sort of think about what does discouragement look like.
You don't have the skills to do this.
You don't have the skill to do this. Y'all were living in Babylon for the last 70 years. Surely you weren't building temples and structures. You can't pull this off. Why bother?
Find ways to sabotage certain small things to put in doubt in people's minds.
Okay, maybe frustrate the effort by removing a pile of bricks that was sitting there ready to go, or the trowel, or whatever else. Good. Other thoughts?
Letting them know that they're wasting their time. You're just wasting your time.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody cares about a wall.
Nothing's good going to come.
What are you doing it for? Nobody cares. We haven't had a wall this long. Why don't
Right.
we do that? That's what I was.
Yeah. All right. So different version of the same idea. It's a waste of time. Surely you could do something better with your time than this. So.
And here it says bribery of the
Yeah, we're going to get there. Hold on. Just hold on, brother. That's verse 5. We're on verse 4. Come on now, Warren. So these are some examples. We don't know exactly what technique they used to discourage and make them afraid. And it does talk about both. But the idea is discouragement. I said, so tactic 1, I've got 9 tactics that I've listed here from these things. Tactic 1, sabotage from within. Tactic 2, use discouragement and scare tactics. The discouragement we've talked about, the scare tactics we haven't quite yet, but we see at the end of that verse that they were made to be afraid to build. So to me, that's a different, it's either a different level of discouragement or something entirely different altogether, with the same goal. We want you all to stop. We try to get inside you, you'd said no to that. We're going to maybe discourage you by telling you it's worthless, and you know, the skills and whatever else. Maybe somehow we want to scare the heck out of you to stop, you know, for fear of your own safety and life. I don't know exactly what tactics, you know, what words they might have used to that effect. But we see here this round 2 of an effort by the enemy or the adversary to thwart these efforts. All right, now, Warren, since you brought it up, would you be kind enough to read verse 5 of Nehemiah chapter 4? Let's let Mark get you first, since you're talking about
officials to work against them and frustrate their plans during the entire reign of Cyrus, king of Persia, and down to the reign of Darius, king of Persia.
All right, very good. So yes, they, you know, what they specifically did, as it said, is they bribed officials. So what does that, you know, look like to us? To me, I labeled this tactic "seek authorities to be involved in depriving of rights or access." Kind of what, you know, what is it like today? So these officials, I don't know exactly what role they played in the life of the exiled Jews, but they may have been the ones to be issuing permits or not. They may have been the ones to be authorizing certain work or not. You know, what does it look like to us today? You know, maybe the enemy is using people in positions of authority to now be a roadblocks. They're not signing off on this piece of paper that you need signed off to bring it to the next thing, to get the next thing you need, to go to step 4, to finally get to where you need to go. The deprivation of rights or access is clearly something that the enemy has used in the history of mankind. Sadly, in our country, you know, I'm not necessarily even talking hundreds of years ago with certain peoples. I'm talking even today. You know, authorities that have the ability to do right or do wrong can be a great impediment to the progress of God's people. And this is an example. Lee, you had a comment.
No, you can.
I'm done.
You can sabotage somebody in the zoning commission or the city council, that kind of thing, especially during election time, to grease the wheels or not.
Yes, exactly. So, and to be clear, I'm not saying that every opposition you get from the zoning authority is the enemy trying to sabotage you, but it's a tool the enemy can use. Enemies can use people. Our ears can be bent by the Lord, and our ears can be bent by Satan, and we can turn in either direction, depending on how our wills align with whoever's talking to us. So in this instance, the adversaries or the enemies decided, let's make our discouragement and scare tactics more amplified by involving officials. And they'll be the ones to come and drop the hammer. They'll be the ones to show up in mass and say, you all got to stop because this violates the edict from the government or whatever, you know, whatever the deal may be. But it doesn't stop there either. So chapter 4, now we're going to go to verse 6. And I'm going to read a couple of segments. One is verse 6 and then verses 11 through 13, which are all part of the same tactic. Can I get a new volunteer to read a couple more verses? Somebody, Chris, thank you. Hang on, your voice is great, but let's still give Mark a chance to get over there. Ezra 4, verse 6, and then verses 11 through 13, please.
And then 11 through 13. All right, verse 6. And in the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah in Jerusalem.
Great, jump to verse 11. So this is the accusation.
This is a copy of the letter that they sent to Artaxerxes the king. Your servants, the men of the province beyond the river, send greeting, and now be it known to the king that the Jews who came up from you to us have gone to Jerusalem. They are rebuilding that rebellious and wicked city. They are finishing the walls and repairing the foundations.
All right, pause. So far, this is actually accurate. I mean, they're showing up and that they're actually doing this. Now it takes a little turn. Go ahead, Chris.
Now be it known to the king that if this city is rebuilt and the walls finished, they will not pay tribute, custom, or toll. and the rural revenue will be impaired.
All right, stop there. So we have no record of that. But this is the letter, this is the accusation. Chris's translation read like mine in verse 6, an accusation against the people to the king, the ultimate authority at this point, because Cyrus is now gone. Recall as we read the book of Ezra, that they didn't have the ally who authorized the return of the people. King Cyrus was gone. Now you have King Artaxerxes, who wasn't involved in that edict, and frankly, it wasn't brought to his attention, but this accusation was, and in the end, they say, and once this city gets rebuilt, these people are going to thumb their nose at you. They're not going to pay you 1 red cent. They're going to be a problem. This is a rebellious city. Go look it up, blah, blah, blah. It's a false accusation, I believe. Again, there's no record anywhere in Ezra that they were indeed going to withhold duty, taxes, whatever else. We know from Jesus' teaching in the New Testament that it's highly unlikely, if not, I won't say impossible, but it's inconsistent with God's view of how people should operate within a civilized nation and within the pay to Caesar what's Caesar's and to the Lord what's the Lord's. And so I think there's every bit of falsity to this accusation. That's a common tactic, isn't it? False accusations?
It happens all the time.
Indeed.
In business now, people make accusations about the leaders of either having affairs or stealing money or taking bribes or something, which can bring down the company.
Yeah, and let's talk about what can happen. So which can bring down the company is one example. What can happen with false accusation? How is that, let me rephrase it. How is false accusation an effective tactic to oppose whatever the thing is that's going to be otherwise done? Why does it work? Why do false accusations work?
Causes doubt in the character of the person.
Good.
Which would then, the main intent is to thwart loyalty.
Okay.
Towards honorable loyalty.
Good. Okay. So you're
implying inhonorable actions.
So and I agree with that, Chris. So your view is the false accusation, if directed towards a leader, what does that do to his team? And his team suddenly thinks, oh, I don't know. I didn't know about that. I didn't sign up for following a guy that's scandalous like this, or I wasn't planning on becoming difficult to the governing. So it can create some problems from within the team. Good perspective. How about outside? Let's look at the view from the outside in. You were going to say something.
I think as sinners,
yes,
we're quick to believe the bad
versus
the good.
Mm.
You're guilty before you're proven.
Yeah, it's not the other way. It's not the other way around.
Yeah, I'm a lawyer, and I'm pretty sure that's like not that.
I mean,
I think I heard that in law school somewhere.
we tend to go that way.
Yes.
I mean, no matter what it is, whether it's a speeding ticket or DUI or embezzlement from a company.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, but also common sense that we've just been taught from wisdom of our elders. There's a ditch on both sides of the road here because, like, I've heard the saying, where there's smoke, there's fire.
Right.
And I think that's the part of the slander and the false accusations is to just have smoke without any flame.
Mm.
But how often in life have we come across, either in our own lives, point the finger first at us, but then at others that we may be peripherally around? If you see evidence of smoke, there was at least friction and eventually cause a flame.
I like the physics analogy. That's good. Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's what's going to cause a flame. So sometimes I think that we do believe the bad first, but I kind of think that we believe the bad as a fault check mechanism, which actually makes false accusations and slander work so well. Because where there is smoke, there's probably going to be fire if there isn't already. So we back up quickly before there's even evidence of flame. And if you do it in a false accusation manner, you got your preemptive strike without actually having a strike.
Well said. Very militaristic in your explanation. I like it.
You see it in our political TV ads and everything, they're trying to taint the other guy with something that's maybe true, maybe not true.
Might be a half-truth or a fifth truth and four-fifths not.
It takes your view of that person and
Yep.
if it's still
Good. So it can do this kind of harm. And this letter was written to a king, and the king said, stop them. So in terms of what can a false accusation do outside of the team, which is what Chris's answer referred to, it can trigger a forceful response, a shutting down, a clear success. You know, if the effort is to oppose and to get in the way, and you can falsely accuse in a way that persuades somebody who can shut her down, then you've won. And in this instance, the adversaries of the Jews won because Artaxerxes wasn't privy to what King Cyrus said, somehow wasn't advised to look into that, did find that the nation, or that Jerusalem was, you know, a difficult city during his heyday, at least as to the enemy nations, and so they shut it down.
That's a regular thing in politics right now.
Of course it is.
False rumors
Yeah.
and allegations.
Yep.
And go on both sides.
Agree. All right, Ezra chapter 5. So we're moving on. There's still more tactics to be looking at. We've got sabotage from within, use discouragement or scare tactics, seek authorities to deprive rights or access. That's really lawyer. That's sounding way too lawyerly now. I'm reading it out loud. Sounds good to me, but I'm saying it like this. People don't talk like this. Authorities get in the way. Tactic 4, false accusations. Now we're going to tactic 5. Ezra chapter 5. Can somebody read verses 3 through 4 of Ezra chapter 5? Gary, great. I know your voice carries like Chris, but let's let the mic get there anyhow.
At that time, Taternal, governor of Trans-Euphrates, and Shethar-Bozenai and their associates went to them and asked, "Who authorized you to rebuild this temple and to finish it?" They also asked, "What are the names of those who are constructing this building?"
All right, thank you, Gary. So we fast forward this, recall as we read Ezra that in the beginning of chapter 5, Haggai and Zechariah came and spoke a word of the Lord to the people that were there now, like a generation later, and said, y'all need to get to work busy, and they did get to work busy, and now this new wave of opposition comes. I really wanted to focus primarily on verse 4, the question, what are the names of the workers who are constructing this building? I saw, well, first off, why would this question be asked? What would trigger Tatani?
The authority, which is questioning the, what do you want to say? Questioning the original purpose. That is this purpose legitimate? Is it authorized? Is it correct?
So let me pause you. All of that is accurate as to the first question. I'm shifting to the second question. Give me the names of the people who are doing the rebuilding. Maybe you were answering that. It sounded like more of the first question.
It's going to imply
okay.
that if this is not correct or not authorized, then the people who are doing it are the real rebellious ones, which are, who are their names.
Okay, thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt you. That was
no,
good. Good. Lee.
I think I'd want, if I was working on opposition, I would want to talk to these builders, these actual people, and maybe I can intimidate them a little bit. And maybe they'll stop, slow down.
Okay.
I've succeeded.
Good. Yeah, intimidate, jail, just yank them from the work crew even if you have that authority. This Tatani is the governor of the Trans-Euphrates, so he has some level of authority. He could probably do something like, "You're out of here, dude. You're gonna come downtown, to the room with the bars for windows." So as I thought of, as I was looking at this as a tactic, the question that was being posed, and it doesn't say who is actually hearing the question, came to the Jews and asked. So we don't know exactly who the Jews were that specifically heard the questions. One, who gave you the authority, and two, give us names. But the idea of give us names, to me, evoked an idea of dividing the house. You're the leader, or you just happen to be here. Who's actually doing the work? Person hearing that question has the chance to answer by saying, well, it was Joe and Steve and whatever else. If they're not thinking through it, they might have just sent Joe and Steve and whomever else, down a very bad place by disclosing who they are. By the same token, the people that are here asking maybe are there with guards and spears or a gun to the head saying, "Tell us who is building the wall," or, again, I don't know, can't paint the picture exactly. But this person who's being asked this question is being given an opportunity to rat out I'm using it in that term. To call out, to rat out others that are doing the work, which ends up creating this divide.
It's betrayal.
You could call it betrayal. Yes. Indeed, a divided house cannot stand, and this is one method, a specific way to create a wedge within a team, or between leader and workers, or between workers even. Heck, maybe this guy isn't particularly fond of Joe and Steve or whomever. Now they got a chance to get rid of Joe and Steve and whomever by saying, "Oh, it was Joe and Steve," and suddenly they're out of their way, but now they've created this friction within the group.
It creates fear among these people who are named.
Absolutely it does.
Of what's going to happen next.
Absolutely it does. By design. I mean, that's...
And they may not be able to do their job because of the fear.
Yep. So sometimes a tactic that the enemy will use is to create some kind of internal disloyalty or divide to weaken the team, through that mechanism. Not just attacking the leader, which we talked about earlier, maybe creating some, I don't know that I can stand next to this person if these accusations are true, but also now perhaps somebody is pointing a finger at somebody else, and that somebody else is now subject to greater heat or oppression or removal or whatnot. So a dividing of the house, I just saw in this episode, this question was an effort to get in and split up the team by dividing it and causing it to bicker against itself and ultimately to fail in its mission. All right, back to Nehemiah. So we're done in Ezra. Go now to Nehemiah chapter 4, which was last week's reading, and then we're going to get into 6, which was this week's reading. Different reader for verses 1 through 3 of Nehemiah chapter 4. Mark is ready to bring over a microphone. Thank you, Patrick. 1 through 3 of chapter 4 of Nehemiah.
But it came to pass, when Sanballat heard that we builded the wall, he was wroth, and took great indignation, and mocked the Jews. And he spake before his brethren and the army of Samaria, and said, What do these feeble Jews? Will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end of the day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which are burned? Now Tobiah an Ammonite was by him, and he said, Even that which they build, if a fox go up, he shall even break down their stone wall.
All right, so in summary, what is this tactic? Jeering, sarcasm, mockery, insulting. Yeah, good. All of that. I labeled it mockery, but mockery is all of those things. Those are the 8 different flavors of mockery. Just making fun. I mean, it's like grade school playground tactics. You're so slow, or whatever. So they're calling out these people, saying, you're feeble. My translation said pathetic Jews. I think yours said feeble, if I heard it right. Even if an animal touches this wall, it's going to fall apart because y'all don't know what you're doing. Just making fun. You would think adults wouldn't be fazed by that or wouldn't do it, but it happens all the darn time. Even now. How many times have you faced a comment, a ridicule type comment, and it had an impact on you? Satan knows this is an effective tactic, so he just mocked his audience in hopes that they would start believing some of this stuff. I mean, that's the goal of mockery, is to have someone sort of start owning the truth of this. I really am pathetic. This wall is going to be terrible. Yeah, why should I bother? And put down the trowel and go do something else.
You think that during the war, all sides did the broadcast and leaflets and all that stuff during World War II to convince the other side to quit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're not going to be able to withstand the forces of Germany, so lie bother, you all are inferior. Absolutely, a lot of that, and even current tactics and current wars are very similar. All right, chapter 6, verse 2. Can I get a different reader for chapter 6, verse 2? Maybe someone near Mark. Good call.
Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, saying, Come and let us meet together at Gath-hepharim in the plain to Ono, but they intended to do me harm.
All right, so I kind of jumped in that. So verse 1 basically says these people appealed to Nehemiah, and that's the me, and so they said, hey, come meet with us. So Nehemiah didn't go, and he knew better than to go, but what is this tactic? What was the attempt by this tactic?
Physical harm.
Okay, good. Physical harm, specifically to the leader. They didn't call out just a worker at the wall and say, hey, come here, we're going to meet with you. They called out the leader with the intent, as it says. They were planning to harm me. So literally, they were trying to get at the leader physically. If you yank the leader out of a team, what kind of chaos is left for the team? They're a sheep without a shepherd. They are a ship without a rudder. They don't know what to do. They probably don't do. That's at least the thought by the enemy. If we can get at the leader, maybe the whole house falls on its face. Thankfully, Nehemiah recognized that that's what was going on. This was not some sort of a diplomatic conference where they're going to talk through the issues. It was he was going to show up and they're going to kill him or harm him.
I was thinking it was. I understand how it could be viewed as a physical attack, but the physical attack of just an impediment under the guise of how you just phrased it.
Diplomatic conference.
Diplomatic meeting.
Yeah. Oh, clearly that was the guys. Yeah, no doubt that was the packaging.
It's an impediment. It's a removal of leadership, an intentional removal of leadership to delay, forestall, and we all know how workers act.
When the boss isn't there. Yeah.
Lax.
Good. Agree. So, yeah, I mean, clearly it's packaged as a let's come and talk it over. We're leaders. Let's figure this out. Nehemiah saw this as a plan to harm him. Was it physical harm? I took it to be physical harm, but your point's taken, Chris. Even if they just pull him out of the leadership, pull him out of the view of his team for a month in this conference, is that also harming him without physically harming him? Maybe so. Clearly the intent, as Nehemiah is diagnosing it, is this is not a well-intended invitation. This is an invitation to do harm. All right, next, chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. I tell you, for the sake of time, I'm just going to summarize, or I should do the reading. Verse 6 is, so this is a letter written to now the new king. And it was written, it is reported among the nations that Geshem agrees that you and the Jews plan to, this is written to Nehemiah, that you and the Jews plan to rebel. This is the reason you are building the wall. According to these reports, you are to become their king and to have even set up the prophets in Jerusalem to proclaim on your behalf, this is the king of Judah. These rumors will be heard by the king. So come, let us confer together. Similar to false accusations, I'll call this spreading of rumors, false rumors. They're closely related. The damage is similar. One thing that we didn't touch on and how it can be damaging is that the one who is the object of these false accusations or false rumors often feels compelled to clear the record, to write their name, which is a commendable thing, but it diverts them from the task at hand. Diverts their resources, diverts their attention, diverts their time. Now I got to deal with calming down this ridiculous thing that now is getting told about me. It's not true, and I'm doing this instead of being here, leading the troops or leading the effort or leading whatever, has gotten the leadership out of the way, so to speak. Lastly, verses 10 through 13, the last tactic of the ones I'm going to list, and I'll quick summarize and we'll say our prayer. I'm going to read it. Chapter 6, verse 10 through 13. I went to the house of Shemaiah, son of Delaiah, son of Mehetabel, who was restricted to his house. He said, let us meet at the house of God inside the temple. Let us shut the temple doors because they're going to kill you. They're going to come and kill you tonight. And there's more to it. Basically, I took this as the tactic that Satan uses sometimes is to impersonate God. This guy was like a prophet. And he was saying, come to the temple. You're in great harm. Come to the temple. The Lord has told me to tell you, you're in grave harm. Come to the temple. And Nehemiah knew that was not the case and called him out afterwards. You've been hired by these opposers of ours. This is not a word from the Lord. We need to be mindful of that. Sometimes things that are packaged as the word, a word from the Lord are not. Satan masquerades as an angel of light, and he masquerades as prophets, and he masquerades as all kind of other things that look godlike and really are not. So just to recap the list that I've got, I have on this list of tactics that the enemy can use to oppose us includes sabotage from within. Again, that's primarily more in a group context than a personal one, but still applies. Use discouragement or scare tactics. Seek authorities to get in the way, less lawyerly, to just get in the way. False accusations. Divide the house. Mockery. Attack the leader. False rumors, which is a subset of false accusations, and sometimes even impersonate God. We see these tactics played out in Ezra and in Nehemiah. These are instances where God is not disciplining his people, but Satan is trying to get in the way of God's people doing God's work. And I thought it might be helpful to kind of walk through those and really sort of see with clarity the methods that are used, so that as we are in our world and we're encountering opposition, first, is this God disciplining us or Satan getting in our way? And if it's Satan getting in our way, he may be using one of these 9 tactics or any others that he has at his disposal. But these are 9 that I saw in the readings, and hope they're some help to us as we equip ourselves to be better like Jesus as we proceed through life. Let me close this in prayer. God, we do thank you for giving us guidance. We thank you for disciplining us, as the words in those verses said. We don't find chastening to be fun but painful at the time, Lord, but we know that you're doing it to form us into the people you intend us to be and more like your Son Jesus. So help us to be discerning when that is what we experience. If indeed we are experiencing opposition from the enemy, from Satan trying to get into our way of doing your will and your work, Lord, I pray that we would be mindful of that we would be maybe better able to detect his workings in our life by looking at some of the tactics he used just within these last 2 books, that are tactics that are still used today. May we be fortified against such tactics. May we be resolute in our desire to do your will, even in the face of opposition, so that you would be pleased with the lives we live and that your Son would be glorified. In his name we pray. Amen. Thank you.